Hi, this is Diane Everett-Snyder coming to you from the Canary Chronicles. Over the last few episodes, we've been talking extensively about the art of living independently. And while, of course, I'm going to continue that thread today, I thought that it would be important to talk about the provenance behind the concept of living independently. Of course, I'd called the Canary Chronicles by that name because I firmly believe that today we, humanity, are the canary in the coal mine of our world and are increasingly inundated with all sorts of things that are not conducive to a life well lived. They're not conducive to a healthy lifestyle, and it's a perpetuating cycle that's getting magnificently worse as time goes on. And the only way to counter the effects of that is to take ourselves out of that environment. And to do so is not to be prepping, because I think I've probably said this before on the show. Prepping is really a misnomer, because prepping is based on fear. And no one should be living their lives on a premise of fear. We need to be living our lives independently and wholesomely. And the way to do that is what I've really focused the last 3 shows on, and is the premise for certainly the next few shows, is to help people understand that this is a complete waste of time to think that you can live as part of our chemical society doing the same things and expecting a different, healthier result. And so in order to have a different, healthier result, we need to get back to living independently and providing for ourselves. So essentially, living a healthy life of independence is passed down from the underlying concept of this notion that we have in our 21st century first world status, and increasingly in a global living paradigm where we have this assumption that we live in this paradigm of abundance, and it truly is a perception, this abundance paradigm, because it's an illusion. The more progressive our country has become, and the more progressive third world countries become as they enter second world status and reach with both hands for first world status, the more social problems and health problems they seem to encounter. You only have to look at the global statistics for health and infant mortality and the mortality rates for women giving birth to understand that these things are all intrinsically linked, and that our concept of an abundance paradigm is lost and diminished the further we move towards what we know as a progressive society. So a perfect example of that would be in a first world country, and let's talk about America. We've embraced this ideology that progress by definition means segregation, compartmentalization, and specialization of our job force. And so you can look at our doctors and our accountants and our bookkeepers. If you look in a hospital, you have so many levels of nursing. Everything has been, and our doctors, you have a general practitioner, you have your gynecologist, you have the endocrinologist, you have the bone setter. They have taken and picked apart not only the human body, but all the elements that go up into making a society, and they've so highly specialized and segregated and compartmentalized everything. And unfortunately, what tends to happen in those situations is all these different departments don't talk to each other. So using the human body as a perfect example, the human body is this machine that operates in perfect harmony and unison with all of its separate but integral parts, and you can't treat the endocrine system separately from the mental system. You can't treat a broken bone without looking at how that broken bone has affected the whole body. And you do that by giving painkillers and, looking at the body as a whole in terms of what you've just treated. And so all of this specialization has really gone such a far way towards disconnecting us from all these different aspects of our lives. Of course, this has been a very encroaching movement of thought over a long period of time, a century, and it's dictated that we all need to specialize in one small area, and then we relinquish all other areas of autonomy in an increasing plethora of hyper-specialization. So essentially, under the current paradigm that we live under, our population is so far removed from their stake of the sum total of value in life, the sum total of what it takes to take care of themselves and their family. And by this I mean that they're removed from the primary functions that have been hardwired into the brain through evolution. And the order of this is shelter, food, relationships, and goals. And our goals must correlate to shelter, food, and relationships. So think about it this way. If people have been so far removed from the perceived burdens of scarcity that they are functionless in any meaningful way in our current society, that is a failing of society. And essentially it begs the question, for you, there's something that you need to ask yourself. What is the actual value of your daily tasks, your weekly goals, and what is your economic stake in your environment beyond the superficial? Essentially, what is the meaning of your life? Is your life filled with shopping and fulfilling materialistic goals and going to the grocery store and swiping a card and buying food that's been provided for you without understanding what went into the provenance of that food? Going to the doctor with whatever aches and pains you have and giving the doctor a brief outline, watching him nod, write a prescription, without you understanding what it is that's going on in your body and having abdicated this responsibility, this onerous responsibility that you have to understand what your body is telling you. And then you dutifully take your prescription and you go to the pharmacy and you fill it and you take the pills home, and you take the pills without truly understanding what it is that those pills are going to do beyond the fact that they're going to fix this thing that you don't really understand that's going on in your body. So you need to kind of stand back and understand and count. And this is a very interesting exercise when you actually stand back and you count over the course of a week all the different ways in which you've abdicated your sovereign right of independence, where you have given the power to make decisions on your behalf to all these other entities. And of course, overwhelmingly, the biggest area where you've given away pieces of yourself is in the choices in what you are putting in your mouth. And so that's really where the art of living independently has its roots, no pun intended. So essentially, we can talk about our discontent with genetically modified foods in our food chain. We can talk about our discontent with the price of vegetables. We can compare the prices of a particular vegetable from one store to the other, and we can, get ourselves into a big knot about forking over all the money that we do for food. Or this is the one area, the single area where you absolutely have the complete authority and power to make the decision to, in some way, grow your own food and contribute to your own meaning on a day-to-day level. And so this is really, in a nutshell, where this whole concept of living a life of independence comes from, and how I've kind of focused the shows. But since I hadn't really gone over this essential little piece of the pie, I thought that I should probably interject it at this point. If you understand that all fresh produce, all living produce that you've just picked off of a tree, like an apple, peach, nectarine, or that you've broken the leaves off of in your vegetable garden, like lettuce, spinach, if you've broken off a cabbage, or if you've dug down into the earth and pulled up a carrot, these things have a photon energy, and it's not something that you're really going to read about in mainstream media, but you can go, if you go and Google biophoton energies or biophoton technologies, start doing some research into the high energy of fresh produce, and you'll understand a little bit more about this paradigm of healthy foods versus toxic foods. You can just leave the whole genetics thing off the table when you're parsing through this kind of information. So if you understand that all the food that you grow has a living, viable energy, and if you understand that all canned food, all food that you buy in a glass jar where the lid pops when you unscrew it in order to access the contents, or in a can where you have to use a can opener, it's very important to understand that that food is essentially dead, because there's pasteurization and then there's pasteurization. And while you can can foods at home as a housewife, the way in which you can at home allows for at least 70% of the nutrients to stay in the food. The way that they can food and process food in big environment situations, all the stuff that goes into grocery stores, is processed and pasteurized in a completely different fashion, and it goes through multiple steps of pasteurization. And essentially what they end up with is a dead product. It has absolutely zero photon energy. And the only reason why they're able to list the nutritional equivalents on the nutrition label is because these are things that they have gone to the trouble of adding. And invariably, all canned food nutrition has been added, and it's the kind of nutrition that it is. All these different minerals and elements and proteins and everything are not the most bioavailable for the human body. So while it may say it has X grams of magnesium or selenium or any of this, they are 9 times out of 10 or more not bioavailable for the human body. So I recently took part in a symposium where the issue at hand was a discussion about health and progress in health food management for the 21st century. And it was very illuminating because it was attended by people who are very active in the industry of health and in food and nutrition. A lot of people from a lot of different committees, all these acronym committees, which I truly detest, because it's almost like the bigger the acronym, the less true biofeedback there is, no pun intended. And there's really an inversion effect in all of these committees. And by inversion effect, I mean that we get all these really smart people together and we talk about all of these things in very, very hypothetical terms, and everyone dutifully nods their heads, and then everyone rushes off to their respective offices and churns out all these very important white papers which get sent off to long industrious corridors all over the countryside, food industry, government, the FDA, the CDC, even the EPA, all these observations and discussion notes and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's just never ending. And essentially all this stuff just gets read, stamped, dated, and filed. And there's really not much real-time application, any meaningful application of these things in terms of truly addressing the issues in our food chain, the issues in the way in which food is grown, the way in which it's moved from the farm through the processing and packaging and distribution. So this whole thing about living independently is something that, of course, is extremely important to me. And as much as I'm involved in the industry, I never eat out. We never eat fast food. I have children that have never eaten a McDonald's burger. They've never eaten chicken McNuggets. They've never eaten fast food fries, because I know what goes into making these things. I know what goes into getting it at the drive-through window. And I would rather my children ate dirt than eat these things. So essentially, I could rant on and on about it for hours, but there's an interesting way of looking at growing your own food. If you think about growing your own food as growing your own money, because it's a multiplier, and your health is the interest earned on growing your food. So if you're growing food, you're printing money, and you're reaping the benefits of the interest of that money. That's an interesting perspective that I like to throw out there. Because, of course, in 1995, a panel of the National Academy of Sciences, or NAS, called for a new poverty measure that included the 3 basic categories of food, clothing, and shelter. And there was a sort of a little subdivision category there for utilities and other needs such as household supplies, childcare, personal care, and all of that stuff. And of course, the U.S. Census presents income data in quintiles, so that's dividing the population in fifths to determine the distribution of income. So households in the lowest quintile in 2005 were earning $19,100 and something a year, and households in the highest quintile earned $91,700 roughly. And then even after you had accounted for the cost of living in different states, it was the information that was generated from reading all of this data was found to really illuminate how much money people were spending on food. And across the United States, of course, there's a huge discrepancy in what a plate of food costs state to state. But by and large, those countries, those states where there is a huge discrepancy in the median day and nighttime temperatures, and those states that have the biggest discrepancy between winter and summer are those that end up spending the most on food. So, and most of that is because that food has to be brought in from somewhere else. So that's kind of the first part of this hour today, was bringing you to that point, because the rest of the time I'm going to be talking about greenhouses and how to utilize greenhouses and how to accommodate a greenhouse to also include your aquaponics system, which is something that I talked about last time. So let's continue and we'll talk about greenhouses. You can buy a commercial unit. I mean, there's lots of kit greenhouses available if you Google kit greenhouses. But, of course, I'm a do-it-yourselfer. So I walked around my house and I looked at the different walls, and I made a list, and I suggest you do this. Make a list of the things. First, you're going to make a list of the things that you want to grow. And you're going to also have a clear understanding of your temperature over the summer and your temperature over the winter. And you're going to make sure that you understand exactly what your needs are. So, for example, I live in California, and the summers can be very, very hot, and the winters can be quite cold. So I wanted a greenhouse that could accommodate cooler growing in the summer and then be my warmer growing in the winter. So the things in the summer, the things that require a lot of heat, I would grow outside, and the things that required a cooler environment, I would grow in the greenhouse. And then you just flip that around for the winter. And those things that require a cooler environment, I grow outdoors under a cold frame. And those things that require a lot of heat, like tomatoes, would then be something that I was growing in my greenhouse. Of course, you also want to really understand what it is that you're going to use to heat your greenhouse and what it is that you're going to use to cool your greenhouse. We have an aquaponics system that's actually in our greenhouse, but in the summer, this last summer, we actually started a greenhouse project where we split up the aquaponics system. And we started a small aquaponics system outdoors in a very shady area, and it was actually quite successful. So this winter I'm going to move the small secondary aquaponics system into the greenhouse as well, and just play around with it and experiment. And that's really what this is. I mean, if you can't have fun with it, then, you've got to kind of sit back and reassess what it is that you're doing wrong, because the whole family needs to be involved in this. Like I've said before, there is nothing that you're doing in terms of growing your own food that can't be and shouldn't be shared with everybody in the household, particularly with children. Because if you involve them in the decisions and what to grow, and if they're involved in the seeding and the transplanting, and if they're involved in taking care of the fish and fishing for the fish and killing and cleaning the fish, they have a vested interest in the outcome. And the sooner you start really involving your kids, the more they start to appreciate what it is that they're putting in their mouth, and the more cognizant they become of the nuances of the differences in flavor and quality. And very quickly, kids that perhaps would not be that keen on eating a particular vegetable will be much more amenable to trying it, because they held that seed in their hand and they took that tiny little transplanted plant and they made the little pocket that went into the aquaponics system, and they watched it grow. So when you are vested in your outcome, it has a very meaningful impact on your life. So something that was important for me with the greenhouse was that it be attached to the side of the house. And that was because I wanted to be able to utilize the air purification that the plants in the greenhouse provided. And I also, in the winter, wanted to be able to have a convection system between the greenhouse and my whole house, so that the air in my house wasn't dry from the heating systems that we have. And we have a fireplace. I try to keep things really low level and as close to nature and natural as possible. Not because I'm some kind of hippie freak, but because I'm cognizant of what it takes to provide the electricity, and I'm cognizant of the check that I have to write otherwise every month to provide for a big fancy heating and cooling system that, if the grid goes down or there's an issue, is suddenly not available to me. So it was important to me to have a greenhouse that attached to the side of the house, so that I could utilize both the cooling and the heating and the moisture and the cleansing of the greenhouse and make it be part of the whole house. So a whole system coexistence, really, for lack of a better word. I also wanted to take advantage of the geothermal properties of the earth. So that involved a little work for us, actually. But I'm going to explain it in fairly simple terms. And again, there's so many options in terms of greenhouses, in terms of a freestanding greenhouse that's not attached to your house, and then for ones that are attached to the house. There are a lot of options. YouTube has some fantastic videos. There's lots of really, really, really good articles and resources on the internet. So I'm, of course, going to talk more about what I have and the reasons why I chose what I chose. And it's up to you to go and do the research and make a list of the things that you think are important for you and your family in terms of a greenhouse. And of course, if you're living in an apartment or a townhouse, there's certain considerations and limitations that you're going to be working with, and it's not impossible. So every time I talk to people and they start justifying why it is that they're not doing something, it's relative only to point out that these are excuses, because for every problem there's a solution, and you need to look at the place that you're living in and identify first the problem, or what you perceive as the problem, and then the solution in how to rectify it to make sure that what you end up with can accommodate your particular needs. So your greenhouse also has to come with some sort of ventilation, so that in the summer when it's getting really hot, you're able to open up multiple points for ventilation. So that would be something high up because hot air rises, and something on the sides. And so we have a dual system whereby we have shades that we pull down over the outside, but all of our vents open from the inside so that it doesn't interfere with the shade that we're also trying to provide for everything that's growing inside. And then you have to think about how many people you're providing food for. And this is an interesting equation. So for every person that you're wanting to provide food for, you have to calculate 3 feet by 3 feet. So that's the first thing. And your base size that you're starting out with is 4 by 4. So before you start calculating the amount of people, you start with a 4 by 4. And then for every person in your household, you add 3 by 3. And the only way that you can adjust that ratio is if you are also taking advantage of growing aerially. So in one of my previous programs, I talked about an aquaponics system where you had plants not only vertically or horizontally in the container, but you had things coming vertically off of it. So when you're building a greenhouse, you then have to decide how you're going to do it. And I highly recommend, of course, that you have things coming out of your aquaponics system, and that you also have aerial supports so that you can hang containers of or hang baskets and other forms of containers to utilize the aerial space that you have. Because why not? You have that space, and so you should utilize it. You're going to an awful lot of trouble to control the temperature. You're going to a lot of trouble to provide this space that's cool in the summer and warm in the winter, and you want to try and utilize as much of the space as you possibly can. So the other thing is, when you're taking advantage of the geothermal properties, what that means is you have to dig down into the earth in order to access the heating and cooling properties of the ground beneath your feet. Essentially, it's really that simple. And you can do this in two steps, meaning you can take one greenhouse and you can have it be on 2 different levels. So on one side, for instance, you can dig down 6 feet, and on the other side, you can dig down only 4 feet. Depending on the size of your greenhouse, you can actually have a ground level that's flat with the earth outside, and where you can house your aquaponics system if that's what you want to do. And then you will have a series of steps going down. And as you have those steps going down, remember that you can also build raised beds that follows the lay of that land. And the nicest thing about accessing the geothermal properties of the earth is that you have far less temperature fluctuations in your greenhouse than you would otherwise. So you have a lot less micromanaging of your microclimate in your greenhouse. Now, of course, 6 feet sounds like an awful lot, but you're going to dig down 6 feet, and then you're going to add 2 things. And the first thing you're going to add is some big rocks, some big boulders, which, of course, you're probably going to have to buy. Or if you look on Craigslist, often people have done landscaping in their yards, and they have broken concrete. And I have friends who've said to me, why on earth do people keep posting on Craigslist that they've got broken concrete and you can come and pick it up? Well, this is one of those perfect situations where instead of going off and buying rocks, and they can be very expensive, you would rather just keep an eye on Craigslist, and or FreeCycle is another website that does this kind of thing, and you can go and pick up some large chunks of broken concrete, and you put them down. After you've dug down 6 feet, you put those down, and then you bring in gravel or lots of small broken concrete, and you want to get a good 1.5 foot of base rock gravel and rock, or gravel and concrete, or various sizes of concrete. And then over that you're going to put, you can use several different things. You can either then use some of the dirt that you had dug out to pack that down with and create an earthen floor. And that's the one that I recommend. So why don't I just leave it at that? Because when you do your research, you will find all these other ideas and suggestions. I have a friend of mine who put in recycled old wood fencing, redwood fencing. That's what they put down on top of their earthen floor, which is nice. Someone else I know that has a huge tile distributorship up the road from them, and so there's always broken tile in their dumpster. So my friends actually weekly would drive over there and collect all the broken tile, and then after they had backfilled some of the dirt onto the top of their rocks and gravel and broken concrete, they used all this broken tile to make a beautiful mosaic pattern. And I mean, it's stunning. So again, it's, how much investment of your time and labor, energy and resources you want to put into it, and that's completely up to you. I do highly recommend that there's one thing that you spend money on, and that is plumbing. That no matter where you locate your greenhouse, that you have a faucet that is in your greenhouse, and don't rely on bringing in a hose pipe from outside into the greenhouse. Because if you have an actual faucet and a water source in your greenhouse, then it's very easy to set up a dual sink. Just an industrial metal sink will do. Or again, if you find something else on Craigslist, go for it. I'm all about this whole recycle thing. But you need to really create an area of your greenhouse that from which you draw your water and have your sink system, because that's where you're going to prepare your seedlings, that's where you're going to wash off your produce, that's certainly where you're going to be skinning your fish and preparing it to take into the house. So it's just so much easier to do it all right there than have, be slipping your dead fish through the house to go and take it to the kitchen. So you want to create a nice work area for yourself there to keep things really clean and efficient. Now, of course, if you live in a place that has a very cold winter climate, like, for example, Colorado, when you're putting your base rock down, you may want to consider putting in some containers, some small barrels of water, and running some copper piping so that you have a distribution of warm water. And it will be warm because in one corner of your greenhouse, the area that's going to get the most natural sunlight, you're going to put a plastic container, if you have it, or an old wine barrel that you've painted black. It's important that it's black so that it absorbs as much of the radiant heat coming through the window of the greenhouse as possible. And you're going to circulate that water, that heated water, from that drum through the piping that's under the ground. And of course, okay, let me backtrack a little. When you've dug down your 6 feet, you can leave the walls as an earthen wall, or you can line it with brick or with pier blocks. Now, if you're working in a very cold climate where it snows, for example, like Colorado, where it gets down to 15 degrees, 10 degrees, or even 0 in the winter, you're definitely going to want to line the lower part below the earth level with something like pier blocks, because you're going to need to run piping up through those bricks so that you can make sure that you can adequately heat your greenhouse in the winter. And really, that's all you need. You don't need to put in a total heating system, because the energy that's required for plants to grow in an environment like this creates their own radiant heat. And so long as the greenhouse in this case is attached to the side of the house, where you are going to open the windows into the house and have a convection airflow system, your greenhouse is going to stay warm enough to grow plenty of food over those long, cold winter months. In California, where your median winter temperature doesn't really get below 34 degrees except for, a handful of times during the winter, it's really not necessary to put in any kind of piping or anything like that unless you are just really gung-ho to build, the biggest, most elaborate system that you possibly can. But I don't have any piping or anything in mind. I do have some barrels, some black barrels that I fill with water in the winter. I don't have them in the greenhouse in the summer because my goal in the summer is to keep the greenhouse cool. But in the winter, I take those barrels into the greenhouse and I angle them right at the front at the windows where they can have maximum exposure to the pale, sad excuse for a sun that we have in the winter months, as a way to really increase the temperature. And by doing that, I have no other heat source in there. I have the windows open, and we actually put in a door. We took out a window and put in a door, which is from my office. So it's very nice in the winter. I can open the door, and there's this huge convection that occurs throughout the house. And that way, the house doesn't get overly hot from the fireplace, and the greenhouse stays nice and warm. And so I managed to grow all my summer vegetables, all the tomatoes and things that need a really, really warm environment the whole winter without any issues of mold or any kinds of things like that sometimes in greenhouses you can have issues with. If things are too damp in a greenhouse, you can end up with mold and other issues. So you really want to check on that. I'm not really going to talk about this too much, but one of the things that you can use to combat mold in your plants in the greenhouse is to use ionized silver. So I make my own colloidal silver, and it's a two-step process. And if you only complete the first step, you've ended up with ionized silver. And sometimes if you botch a batch of colloidal silver, you end up with ionized silver. And I never throw it away. I put it in a spray bottle, just a cheap plastic spray bottle. And I use it. I go in there and I spray it preventatively in the winter on my tomato plant leaves. And not a whole lot, just a little to combat and guard against any mold that's going to manifest itself in my vegetable garden in the greenhouse in the winter. And then one of the side walls of our greenhouse is actually solid construction. It's not glass. And that's the side that we have our aquaponics system against. And it's painted black. But in the summer, I hang a light-colored top over it so that I'm not creating more heat. But in the winter, I take that top down so that that black color is exposed, and it helps draw that latent heat from outside into the greenhouse. So when you're looking at different plans, you need to know, and you've identified the wall that you're going to use for your greenhouse if you're attaching it to the side of the house. These are all things that you need to really consider and think about, because there's all these ways that you can create heat for your greenhouse in the winter. But conversely, you need to be cognizant of the fact that in the summer, you're going to want to be able to flip the dial on what your winter practice has been. So it's important, to understand that. And then, of course, if it's a freestanding greenhouse, for integrity of the building, you're going to have the back wall be solid. I know there's plenty of greenhouse plans that don't have a solid wall, but it's been my experience. We actually lived in Colorado for several months, and so we just had a temporary greenhouse, and we had it angled against a wooden fence, and we thought, well, this will be fine for the amount of time that we're here, because it was just a temporary structure. But those winds come up, and it didn't destroy the greenhouse. But I'm pretty sure that if we had had that system in place for several years, we would have had to really reinforce it and do more work on it. But it was a rental, and it was just a temporary situation. So it worked for us. But you absolutely, if it's a freestanding greenhouse, you absolutely need at least one solid wall. And that's all I'm going to say on that. And then, of course, you can decide if you're going to angle the roof and have it also be greenhouse plastic or be glass. Or you can decide to have a solid roof. But if you have a solid roof, then you understand that your greenhouse has to be at an angle. So the base has to be a lot wider than the roof so that you can draw the solar energy into your greenhouse. But you'll figure it out when you start looking at plans and doing the research. And understand that this is fun. This is fun with capital letters, because you get to sit down and you get to talk about all the things that you want to grow, and then you get to go out and walk around your house or around the walls that would work for your townhouse, or you need to identify those spaces in your apartment complex that would be most conducive to this. And now, especially when you're talking about apartment buildings, you have these vast walls that go up really high. So you need to be aware of the fact that you can really go taller than you think you need to, so that you can take advantage of all that aerial growing space and involve other people. I mean, this is all about team effort, because the more people, I'm talking specifically now for apartment dwellers, the more people that you involve in the project, not only the bigger the project's going to be and the more produce you're going to be able to grow, but the more help you're going to have. And a job halved is less work. That's truly the truth. The other thing that is very, very useful, particularly if you have a greenhouse that's attached to the side of the house, is to have an exterior door. I know people that have thought that it wasn't necessary because they had actually built a greenhouse attached to the side of the kitchen, for example, and so the kitchen windows opened, or one of the kitchen windows opened directly into the greenhouse, and they had a door from the kitchen into the greenhouse. But I got to tell you, it is extremely important to have an exterior door to your greenhouse for when you're moving dirt, bringing in compost, bringing in more fish, taking fish out. You got to have an exterior door. And a lot of the plans that you see online will talk about the ways in which you need to build your floor, your foundation for your greenhouse. And this is the third greenhouse that I've done. It's the third property that I've done a greenhouse on. And I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt that putting in an actual floor for a greenhouse is an utter waste of time, and kind of defies the entire purpose and methodology of doing it the way that I've explained. Because if you're digging down and you're accessing the geothermal properties of the earth, and you've got your broken down concrete and your gravel, and you've backfilled with earth, and irrespective of whether you've spent weeks putting in a mosaic tile floor on top of that, you certainly don't want a floor to be at the very bottom underneath all that, because you want to be able to have fun in there and get messy and spray water and have the kids not have to tiptoe around and be careful of making a mess. I mean, gardening is by definition a messy, dirty situation, and when you're doing this kind of stuff, this is the time when you have to embrace getting dirty, getting wet, getting things a little muddy, and you want to be able to have any water that is spilt in the greenhouse be able to just drain away all the way down into the earth. So regardless of what plans you're looking at, please don't waste your time putting in an actual floor in a greenhouse, because it's completely and utterly redundant. And what will end up happening is you're spending so much time reinforcing and working with rot issues and all sorts of fundamental issues that go along with having a constructed floor, that you just don't want to create that headache for yourself at all. All right, so we've talked all these different things about greenhouses, and something that I want to point out is that if you have a greenhouse and you have citrus trees in barrels, for instance, and in one of the previous shows I talked about the fact that I have always recommended building small platforms with wheels to put barrels and container gardens on so that you can move them around. That way in the summer you can move them where they need to be, and then you can move them where they need to be for the winter without absolutely killing yourself. So one of the beautiful things about having a greenhouse is that you can actually have your fruit trees and your citrus trees in the greenhouse. And so when you're digging down, instead of digging down 6 feet, you may decide to dig down 8 feet to accommodate some of your miniature fruit trees and miniature citrus trees. And when space becomes an issue, remember this, that you can graft branches from different kinds of citrus onto each other. So for instance, if you have a lemon tree that's doing really well, you can get a graft, a piece of a branch, cut a branch off of somebody else's citrus tree and graft it onto your citrus tree and have a branch of a different kind onto your citrus. So, and the same goes for stone fruit, and the same goes for apples. For example, I have an apple tree in my greenhouse in a wine barrel, in a 3/4 wine barrel, so that the roots are adequately protected. And that one apple tree actually has 4 different kinds of apples on it. So when you do that kind of thing, different apples get ready at different times of the year, and likewise for pears, and likewise for cherries. And all of these are conducive to having grafts put on them, and that way you can have the cherries that are earlier in the season, and so those branches of your cherry tree will be ready early, and then the other crops, the other branches that are different cherries, will be ready at different times, and likewise for your apples and your pears. And that's a way to really maximize your space. And so for fruit trees, of course, they're going to be outside in the summer months. And if you're in a cold climate like Colorado, you can wheel them into the greenhouse for the winter. And the way in which, so I had said that you need an exterior door, and your exterior door will be at the highest point of your greenhouse, and you'll have a slope. So you won't build stairs. You have a slope, a graded slope going down into the greenhouse. That way it becomes very easy for you to use a dolly, for example, to take containers in and out of your greenhouse, depending on your needs and the changes in the climate. Now for citrus, in a very cold climate, you're going to keep them year-round in the greenhouse. But you might decide that you want to move it to a different location in the greenhouse, depending on what your needs are for planting requirements for other things at different times of the year in the greenhouse. But citrus trees, of course, you can graft kumquats and limes onto a lemon tree, or you can graft lemons and kumquats and even grapefruits onto a lime tree. And when you do that, you have to really be cognizant of your little tree, and even be prepared to build some supports for it. And then that brings me to, what are you going to grow against the back wall of your greenhouse, the one that's against your house? And this is a good place to put the containers that are going to have trees in them that are going to stay in the greenhouse year-round, more so than the things that you're going to move around, because you can do a raised bed with a solid wall at the back, so that you're not getting the exterior wall of your house wet all the time. But you can then put these containers, before they're full of plants, while they're still empty, you can construct your raised beds so that these containers are at the back against the wall of the house. And then you're going to fill them with soil, and you're going to put your trees in there, and then you can espalier these trees. And espalier is the art of controlling the way in which the branches grow, so that they grow to the left and the right, but you keep the back of the branch completely clean. You keep pruning it, and you might consider pruning the very front of it, so that your trees end up growing very flat sideways against the wall of the building. And if you're going to do that, you can consider alternating and putting grapevines, because grapevines of course, do very, very well espaliered, as do kiwis. The only thing, of course, with kiwis is you have to have a male and a female. And there's a lot of those kinds of vines. There's pawpaw vines, all kinds of exotic things that you can grow, but you just have to be cognizant of the fact that you'll need a male and a female. But espaliering fruit trees for use in a greenhouse is a very space-efficient way to utilize space that otherwise wouldn't be useful at all, because you can't really have hanging baskets against that wall, because you don't want to keep getting the exterior wall of the house wet. Then, of course, the wall, the one solid wall that you have in your greenhouse, usually it's on the opposing side to where you have your exterior door. And that's not cast in stone, but that's generally the way the plans are constructed. And even if you're going to build your own one, it's important to look at a lot of different plans that are online, because it really helps you to figure out a lot of the issues and problem solve before you actually start your construction. But that one wall that's solid, the one that you're going to paint black to be able to utilize the radiant heat in the winter, and then in the summer you're going to cover it with something pale, or you just, if you have the energy, you're just going to slap on a pale coat of paint in the summer, and then you're going to paint it black in the winter. But against that wall, you might even consider putting up old guttering, old plastic guttering, even metal guttering. And what you can do in that is you're going to first drill some holes in the bottom. Then you're going to hang it up on the wall at a slight angle. So the left side or the right side will be just a fraction lower than the opposing side. And you fill it with soil, and you can grow lettuces in there, or you can grow parsley or basil or any of the brief crops with a shallow root system. You can grow in there, and it's a really amazing way to use that wall that otherwise wouldn't necessarily be used, and that's a way to really maximize your space too. Even though you're going to be growing in your aquaponic system, you may want to consider growing additional crops that you can sell to people in your neighborhood as a way to offset some of the costs of doing business with your greenhouse. And I don't recommend that you keep your seeds that you harvest from your produce in the greenhouse because of the moisture issues. So seeds are something that different seeds you dry differently, and you some people say you store them differently. Well, I have never gotten that technical about the ways in which I store my seed, and my seed is always taken, and it's always been viable. So I think it's like with everything, where you can take it to the nth degree if you really want to, if that floats your boat. If you are really that much of a type A personality, then you can go that extra mile. But I have just found that it's really not necessary. And so all my seeds I keep in tiny little Ziploc bags, and I poke a couple of holes in the plastic so that when you seal the plastic bag, it's not actually hermetically sealed. There's still some airflow, and I just keep them loose. I label everything, and I say this during every show: label, label, label as you go, because you think you're going to remember, but you really don't. And then I just keep them in a couple of shoe boxes on a shelf in my office, actually, because it's the one place that's just not too crazy. It might get messy, but it's not crazy. And then bulbs and things I'll keep in the freezer over the summer and plant them in the fall. But that's about as technical as my seed saving goes. I think we are running out of time. So I want to remind you that any feedback that you want to give me, or any comments or questions that you have, feel free to email me, Canary Chronicles @outlook.com. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I'll be back next week to talk some more about herbs and botanicals, and we'll talk about how you grow them in your greenhouse. Thank you very much. Have a fantastic week.
They are called the Doomsday Preppers, and they say the whole mess in Washington is but one sign of impending disaster. And these guys are not taking any chances. Here's ABC's David Wright.
What if the end came not with a bang, or a boom, or the blast of a trumpet, the seventh trumpet of Revelations, that is, heralding the final woe of the apocalypse? No, what if the end were self-inflicted? What if all it took was a breakdown of the political system we all take for granted to trigger the ultimate collapse of civil society? A collapse significant enough to cause a run on the banks, and the gas pumps, and the grocery store shelves. That's a doomsday scenario, and that's the lens through which doomsday preppers view what's been going on in Washington this week.
The economy is by far number one. I would say 80 to 90% of the people that I deal with, they're concerned about where the country is heading economically. They're worried about their future jobs.
Scott Hunt runs a doomsday academy of sorts in South Carolina, training people to be self-sufficient in the end of days. His company, Practical Preppers, is a one-stop shop for survival. The last few weeks, he says, business has been booming.
We've seen a considerable uptick in emails, phone calls, a lot of contact through social media for help, whether it's teaching, whether it's equipment, installations, information.
Hunt is also a consultant for the National Geographic Channel show Doomsday Preppers. He says his customers are deeply concerned.
I mean, it's unsettling when the government doesn't function, and the government's there to serve and protect its people, and when it's not functioning, and then there is, there's an uneasiness in people from all walks of life.
He says one of the big things his customers fear is anarchy. To them, it doesn't matter if anarchy is brought on by natural or man-made disaster. Doesn't matter whether it's encouraged by left-wing activists angry at big corporations or right-wing activists angry at big government. Either way, the result they see is the same. In the future they see, it's every man and every woman for themselves.
I'm preparing for an economic collapse.
Kurt is one of the stars of the new season of Doomsday Preppers.
The government has been infiltrated. It's been infiltrated by corporations, banks, financial institutions, labor unions, and a lot of special interests.
What scares him the most is the crushing burden of U.S. debt. Yes, even the deficit means doomsday to some people.
When our $16 trillion becomes due, we will be in big trouble and the government will be shut down, basically. All the things that we take for granted every single day could possibly be gone. Gas for your car to get anywhere. Electricity could become an issue. Food will not be at your grocery store any longer. I think it could get really desperate and nasty.
For more news, visit youtube.com/PigMine2.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.